All right, let's dive in. We're going to explore the Enlightenment, a really pivotal moment in history that, believe it or not, created two very distinct paths of thought. And these paths, they continue to shape our world and, crucially, our ministry today.
And there's no better place to start than with the words of the philosopher Immanuel Kant. Back in 1784, he wrote this in a magazine article, and he just perfectly captured the core of this whole movement with a simple, powerful command: have courage to use your own reason. And that idea, it became the rallying cry for a whole new era.
So, what exactly was this enlightenment that Kant was talking about? He mentioned this idea of self-incurred tutelage. What in the world does that mean? Well, let's unpack that a little. You know, Kant basically saw all of human history as this big process of growing up. For centuries, he argued, societies had been acting like children, just doing what they were told by the two big authorities, the state and the church. Kant and his friends were saying, hey, it's time for humanity to finally become an adult, to think for itself and to take charge of its own future.
So what was the fuel for this engine of change? Well, it really came down to three huge, and I mean incredibly optimistic ideas. These thinkers believed that if we just applied critical reason to everything, if we understood the laws of nature, and if we believed in human progress, we could finally break free from the old ways and build a much brighter, more reasonable world.
Okay, so with that foundation, let's look at the first major path that split off from this new way of thinking. And this path was forged by the sharp, critical, and often controversial mind of Voltaire.
I mean, this guy's life was just as dramatic as anything he wrote. He was constantly battling the authorities, getting thrown in prison, getting exiled, having his books banned. But that exile to England, it was a game changer. He went there as a writer but came back to France as a full-blown philosopher, armed with the scientific genius of Newton and the ideas of Locke.
And you can really boil his whole life's mission down to this one fiery phrase: écraser l'infâme, or crush the infamous thing. So what was the infamous thing for Voltaire? It was any kind of unthinking belief that led to hatred and violence. And for him, target number one was the institutional church, which he saw as a breeding ground for fanaticism.
Now here's something really important to get straight. It's easy to hear all that and think Voltaire was an atheist, but he wasn't. He was what we call a deist, and he used this really simple but powerful analogy to explain how he saw God.
This is a really core concept for understanding Voltaire. He looked at the universe with all its intricate order like a complex watch and said, this has to have a designer. But, and this is the big but, he believed that once that designer, God, created the universe and wound it up, he just stepped back. He let it run on its own.
But there's a problem, right? This neat, tidy, rational view of God smacks right into a huge wall, a question that absolutely tormented Voltaire, especially after a massive earthquake in Lisbon killed tens of thousands of people in 1755. How could a good God in an orderly universe allow for such random, horrific suffering?
So how did he deal with this? Well, he took on that philosophical optimism head-on in his famous book, Candide. And the conclusion his hero comes to isn't some grand, abstract answer. It's incredibly practical. In a world full of pain that we can't explain, he says the only sensible thing to do is to stop arguing and get to work on the one thing you can control, your own small patch of the world.
But, not everyone in the Enlightenment was on board with Voltaire's path of pure, cold reason. A second and totally different path opened up. And this one was carved out by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a man who basically said, forget the head, let's talk about the heart.
And right from the get-go, Rousseau's whole worldview was the polar opposite of what most people thought. While everyone else was celebrating progress and civilization, Rousseau looked at it and said, that's the source of all our problems. He believed we are born good, and it's society that messes us up. And this one single idea, that nature is good and society is the problem, it led him to some pretty radical conclusions about, well, everything. He imagined an education system that protects a child's natural goodness from society, and he envisioned a political system based not on a king's power, but on the collective will of the people themselves.
So just like Voltaire, he wasn't a fan of traditional, institutional religion. But what he replaced it with, it was a world away from that cold, distant watchmaker God. He offered something deeply personal, a religion of the heart.
He lays all this out in his book, Emile, and in it, he describes this faith where the ultimate authority is your own inner conscience. Truth isn't found in a book or a church doctrine, it's found in your feelings. God isn't a philosophical problem to be solved, he's a presence to be adored with a sense of wonder. That is a massive shift from Voltaire's rationalism. Okay, so why are we talking about a couple of 18th century French guys? Why does any of this matter for your ministry right here in Nigeria today? Well, here's why. These two paths didn't just end in the 1700s. They lead directly into our modern world and right into the pews of your church. And this is where you can see the fundamental clash between the two. Voltaire, with his detached, rational God, has some echoes of ancient Epicurean thought. He really represents the modern mind, skeptical, analytical, trusting only what reason can prove. He's all about the head. Rousseau, on the other hand, with his focus on nature and inner virtue, feels a lot more like the ancient Stoics. He represents the modern heart, valuing authenticity, personal experience, and feeling above everything else.
Just think about this for a second. When someone in your congregation expresses doubt about miracles because they don't seem scientific, you're hearing an echo of Voltaire. When someone says, look, I don't really care about all that doctrine, I just know what I feel in my heart is true. Or when they say they're spiritual but not religious, you are hearing the voice of Rousseau. See, these aren't new ideas. They're the living legacies of the Enlightenment.
So this is the challenge, isn't it? This is the big takeaway from our whole conversation. You are being called to lead and to minister in a world that is a direct product of both of these powerful ways of thinking. Your task, then, is to present a rich, biblical faith that is strong enough to answer the skeptic's tough questions, but also warm enough to speak with grace to the searching modern heart. A faith that fully engages both the head and the heart.